So welcome everybody to this next episode of the Good Woke, Not Bloke podcast. And I'm really excited. I've got Nick Bracks coming as my guest this week. I'm really excited. I've been on Nick's podcast a couple of times and he's just got so many good things to say. But before we sort of introduce Nick, I just wanted to let you know that I'm back in Melbourne and back here for autumn. I mean, for those of you who don't know, Melbourne's weather in autumn is some of the best in the world. It's extraordinary, broad, sunny days. They're warm, not too hot, and sea breezes, and it's just beautiful. And on the weekend, I went down to the Awaken Festival at the Peninsula Hot Springs with my partner Lassen, who'd just come in from the US. And what an extraordinary event. If you've never been to the hot springs, you do need to go there. And it's worth a trip to Australia just to go to the hot springs. It really is. And I had a really interesting experience, which you'll love, Nick. I was invited by Bharat Mitra, who is a part owner of the hot springs, and he was also the founder of Organic India, which is a huge corporation and a great story. And he said to me, you have to come and do a tea ceremony. And so we go into this burqa tent and we sit there basically on cushions, and it's very silent, and there's a guy sitting at the table and he goes through this amazing ritual of rinsing out the cups and preparing the tea and pouring small amounts of tea, and then you hand it around and you take the tea and you take your time to drink the tea. And when you finish, it goes back and he goes through another ritual of making more tea and pouring more tea. And over about an hour, I think you get about 5 different cups of tea, but it's probably all in all 1 cup of tea. But what happens is you become so present and it puts you into this really deep contemplative space. And it's really beautiful. And where my contemplations went were quite extraordinary. So anybody who's never done a tea ceremony, it's worth it. It really is worth it. And it gave me a new appreciation for tea. So welcome, Nick. Good to see you.
Mate, thank you for having me on here. I'm excited to be on your podcast after having you on mine a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, I really loved being on your podcast. It's so beautiful and just so easeful. We had some great conversations, which were really good. So I probably should tell our audience a little bit about Nick Bracks. I mean, people in Australia might know a little bit about you, because you really grew up in a pretty well-known family here in Australia, and I certainly was very aware of your dad. He was a great politician. But Nick is the founder and CEO of a software company called Move Your Mind Proprietary Limited. And he currently hosts a podcast, Move Your Mind, with Nick Bracks and Soul Trader, a radio show by Disrupt Radio on DAB+. So Nick Bracks has dedicated his entire adult life to destigmatizing mental illness through storytelling. And I'm a big fan of storytelling, as you know, Nick. Growing up in one of the most famous political families in Australia, Nick was exposed to life in the public eye since he was 12 years old. Struggling to cope with depression and anxiety through substance abuse, Nick first gained his own notoriety in his early 20s through a publicly documented car crash that nearly killed himself and his best friend. The drunk driving incident became a catalyst for Nick to turn his life around, exposing his mental health issues and allowing him to get the help he desperately needed. The media attention he gained after the crash led to a modelling career and an invitation to participate as a contestant on Dancing with the Stars. While on Dancing with the Stars, Nick took the opportunity to speak publicly about his battle with depression and anxiety, becoming a pioneer in mental health advocacy. Since then, Nick has developed a successful public speaking career on the topic, conducting over 1,000 talks at organisations around the world, including several TED Talks. Now, I've never done a TED Talk, Nick, so we need to talk about that. The Neighbours actor, and for those of you who don't know what Neighbours is, it was one of the longest running soapies in the world. Amazing. So the Neighbours actor is also a successful entrepreneur, founding Move Your Mind Proprietary Limited, a corporate wellness software for employees in construction and similar industries. Nick released his first book with publisher Wiley in 2021 and currently runs a podcast under the same name, Move Your Mind. So, Nick, I mean, we could talk forever about your platform that you've created for the construction industry, because as you know, I'm passionate about that industry. But today we're going to talk about healthy masculinity and how that all works. And before I start asking you questions, is there anything you'd like to add after your introduction?
Mate, more than you've done me too much justice in that introduction. I think it sounds probably better than what it actually is, but I think that's what I've got on my website that I sent to you. So good, good marketing there. So
Well, yeah, I mean,
I like it.
I feel like we've got a bit of an affinity because right from an early age, I was always entrepreneurial. I think more because I didn't want anybody to control me. I didn't like working for somebody else, and I always had a head full of ideas of things I wanted to do and try. And God, I've had that many failures, catastrophic failures, but had some really good wins along the way. And I'm wondering where that drive came from you, because you're obviously incredibly an entrepreneurial young guy. I mean, you had your own fashion brand, didn't you, for a while?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to what you're saying. And I did my first business was a underwear label, and this was just after Dancing with the Stars. And during that period, I was uh, getting modeling work and getting underwear modeling work of all things. So I thought, you know what, I've got all this publicity doing this underwear modeling. Why not? People made jokes about, you should have your own underwear label. So I thought, well, why not? I want to do. I'd never done a business before, so that was the first one, but. I think it was similar. I mean, I know you've got a sporting background, and like you're saying, you don't want people to control you. You want to create your own destiny, have that freedom, having all these ideas. Exact same thing for me. So it's just stemmed from that, and it's been it creates a very interesting life journey because there's so many failures that I've had and falling flat on your face. But at the same time, that's where you learn so much, not just about business but about yourself and resilience and how to get over your ego, because when you're going through these things alone and you don't have that anything to fall back on and you're having things not work, you've got to find, okay, what do I actually care about? So it really makes you look very deep within yourself, and constant journey, I guess.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? I look back on my time and I think probably one of the things that impeded my progress the most is a refusal to actually admit to myself that I'd failed in certain things and still trying
Yeah.
to paint them and decorate them as some sort of success, because my ego was just so gigantic. I couldn't let myself admit to people, you know what, I've really screwed that up. I've completely destroyed it. I've messed it up. And to be okay with that, I mean, I can go there now. It's fine, but it's very interesting. And I think probably the challenge is I didn't have enough good mentors around me who could wade their way through that ego and help me sort of, land where I needed to be. So, this podcast is all about developing healthy masculinity. And as I describe in the podcast previously, I see that as about developing a strong personal moral compass and then having the courage to live by that moral compass. And I'm just interested in your pathway in that, because I don't reckon I really landed till my mid 40s, you know.
Mm,
Uh,
mm.
and I'm just interested in your pathway in that.
Well, it's a constant journey, and I'm 37 now and still very much, learning and growing, and still have an ego, still have things I'm, realizing that I need to overcome. I think having, my current partner is amazing, and she, like any good partner, will challenge me on things where I need to grow, and it can be really hard, but it makes you confront things. And so I'm continually realizing that I've got so much to go. But at certain stages, you think that you've sort of got to a point where you understand everything, and you realize, well, no, I actually didn't. And I was laughing before when you were saying about, not wanting to admit to yourself in the past when things weren't working, and because I've just done it so many times, and I'd be furious when I'd realize that it wasn't right and the ego's in the way. And then the other thing of I've also had periods when I was a lot younger and more vulnerable, where I just actually had people around me, but they were the wrong kind of people, and they're giving me bad advice and
Mm,
just paying me platitudes, telling me how great I was to my own detriment, because I enjoyed hearing that and
mm,
kept doing what I was doing and kept making the same mistake until I found good mentors. So I think that's a really important thing. But I mean, I think healthy masculinity is really being able to, as a man, really look into your authentic self, being
yeah.
able to peel back those layers and be honest with yourself, be able to be honest enough that, hey, this is who I am at the core. This is what I stand for. These are my values. This is what I want to put out into the world, and then try and live by that. And that's a continual process, and that's a very human process. But I
Mm,
think it's something that a lot of men don't do because we're told that we need to be something that we're not. We might feel pressure that I'm not enough of a man if I'm not able to provide enough for my partner, or I don't have a high enough paying job, or whatever it is, or we might be successful, but in an area that we didn't want to go down because our parents made us feel like we should do that. So there's so many layers, but I think it's at the core, just being able to be true to yourself and keep
mm.
challenging yourself on that.
It's so interesting, and like those points that you bring up, and I find it really fascinating because I've got a lot of female friends, and I talk to them. Some of them are out there on the dating circuit, and they're using the dating apps. And like one of them got so frustrated with men, she decided to try dating women, because she felt like she'd go to have these coffee catch-ups and these men all they did was talk about themselves and they had to assert their success or how funny they were and they couldn't just connect and get really interested in her. And I see these ideas that seem to still be running with a lot of men that they have to be a certain something but it's repulsive to women.
That's such a good point. And I mean, this is it's such a complicated thing because, and I mean, I'm in New York where it is the epicenter of people putting on these personas. And when I was first here, I was single and I was going on dates, and I very quickly lost confidence, became self-conscious because I would be going on dates with these women, and I was, I mean, I was probably going on dates with the wrong women, but it's like in that world and through the apps and everything, you're meeting these well, and they're used to guys that are going to just fawn over them, tell them how amazing they are, go above and beyond. And if you don't do that, they'll move on to the next one and the next one and the next one. So then it made me start feeling like, okay, I don't feel like I'm enough if I just be honest and be vulnerable and be myself, which I can't help doing. And
Mm,
it made me have those thoughts. And then I saw like a lot of my friends, buying into that and doing that behavior. And so it
mm,
becomes this thing fueled from both sides, where at the end of the day, we all need to just learn to be authentic and just, who
yeah,
cares? Just be yourself. And you're gonna, I mean, if you can trick someone into dating you because you're someone you're not, eventually they're gonna find out who you are. So you're just gonna waste each other's time anyway.
yeah, so true, isn't it? It's like, I mean, I did a lot of dating. Something that was really funny. Christmas before last, I was sitting having lunch, and at the table was my nephew from my first wife's marriage, and he's like 27. He's sitting there with his girlfriend, and then my first wife's brother's daughter. She was sitting at the table with my grandson on her lap, and she was 19. And I said to my nephew, "Where did you two meet?" And she said,
Mm.
"On Hinge." I said, "You're kidding? I'm on Hinge." And the 19-year-old said, "So am I." Like, it was
Yeah,
amazing. But it led me into a contemplation, Nick, that I thought was really cool, is that I actually believe that those apps shouldn't be called dating apps. They should be called connection apps. Because I think
yeah,
people are craving more than anything right now is connection. And the reality with those apps is I made a lot of friends on them, you know?
yeah,
And I made friends because, like you, I turned up and I'd just be me. I'm a curious bastard and I want to ask them questions. I want to learn about who they are. And some said to me, "Oh, no, you're a bit heavy for me." and that's okay. But I made some really cool friendships out of those apps, and I just wondered if men looked at that and said, "Hey, I'm going out to meet somebody who could be a friend here, and maybe I'll
Mm.
be lucky and meet somebody I love." I wonder if they could drop the pretense a little bit and just be a bit more real.
I think so, because exactly like you're saying, I mean, it's all the technology's there to help us connect. And if we can just remove that expectation and all of these, like you're saying, remove the word dating app and just have it as a connection app, then you're free to just meet people and then probably organically meet the right person. But
Yeah.
it's yeah, I mean, I see it, the stuff we're talking about with the masculinity side, I just see so many people here that just feel, you can tell they desperately want to be themselves, but they don't know how to be, and it's
Mm,
crazy.
yeah, I agree, mate. And it's like this, I suppose there's such confusion. I remember I wrote something once that said, to be a man, you don't have to be the man. And I grew up with watching Clint Eastwood and John Wayne and Charles Bronson and all those really tough guys. It's like, and you had to walk around. I even tried to learn how to walk and look a bit tough and a bit cool. But inside, if it ever came to any sort of confrontation, I was shit scared. I didn't want to do that sort of stuff. And I imagine you grew up watching different people. You're probably watching, I don't know, Steven Seagal or, you know, I don't know who, but I'm interested to know, like, you're closer to that age than I am now, and I still have clear memories. What was it like for you coming through your late teens and your early 20s and your perception of how you needed to be as opposed to what you know now is how the best way to be is?
Oh yeah, night and day. It was feeling like I needed to uh you know be ultra successful. I needed to be, showing how much money I had, or getting to a point where I could show how much money I had. I felt like I needed to, you know, be someone I was not to get women, and was actually, for a while I had a drinking problem, binge drinking problem in my late teenage years, early 20s, and I had no confidence. So I would use alcohol to give myself that false confidence and present this
Mm,
image that wasn't actually me to these women. And then I would be too scared to actually go on see them a second time. I'd meet them out at
yeah,
a club or whatever, and then I wouldn't want to go on a date because I was too scared. I was actually terrified of going and them seeing me for who I was, because I felt like it wasn't enough.
yeah,
So it was all of these perceptions in my mind of what I was meant to be, and that the real me just wasn't enough. So I thought I would only be enough when I got to X. And then I'd have to, yeah, like I was saying, put on this persona. And that just meant I couldn't have intimate relationships. I, couldn't present who I actually was. And it only eventually works against you in all areas. So it was
amazing,
took
isn't it?
a quite a long time to learn.
Yeah. I mean, I got to admit, mate, I'm 64 now and I'm in a fairly new relationship. And, I was talking to my partner about it because she's a very awake human being like me. She's done an enormous amount of avatar work and she still delivers avatar courses. And you can still sometimes feel those teenage little thought bubbles, those little fears that are still there. It's like,
But
how
yeah,
could somebody so beautiful want someone like me? That sort of stuff. And it's like, but
yeah,
but the reality is not never having those thoughts. It's having the awareness to notice those thoughts and not let them take hold, let them go past. But
exactly. Yeah.
and I know you've done a lot of meditation, and do you feel like meditation helped you in that capacity to sort of notice what your mind is doing and not fall into it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's interesting, like you're saying. I think that's what you learn when you do this work on yourself and become more self-aware, that um, it's not about ever getting to a point where everything's just okay. It's about having that awareness and knowing how to actually deal with things when they come up, and accepting that it'll probably never get to a point where you won't have some sort of insecurity or issue or whatever. But that's part of life. So yeah, meditation was one of the first things I got into. I mean, exercise I've always done, and I find that meditative as well.
Yeah.
Um, Meditation, like you said, it gave me that ability to slow the mind down and be able to uh, become more self-aware, evaluate certain things. But there's so many things. It's crazy how many things come up all of the time. I mean, one of them, was even a recent one I'm thinking of with my girlfriend. I remember always thinking, I just if I can meet the right girl and have these things happen, if I can just get myself to a point where I'm, doing what I want to do, doing my podcast and my acting and whatever else, and even if it doesn't work, if I can just do that and I'm with a partner who accepts me for who I am and is happy for me to do that, that'd be great because I had all these insecurities in the past that how can I, it might be hard to meet a partner who is okay with what I want. And she's all of that and more, so supportive in it. Yet, with all of that, I keep having this fear of what if I don't make enough money? What if this happens? What if I run out of money? What if this doesn't work? And even though I'm doing what I want to do, and I communicate that to her, and it's just interesting that even when, the things that are happening that I have the things in my life that I want, I still have to really fight against these conditioned thoughts that something terrible is going to happen if I don't have complete certainty around all these things that I can't control. And it's tough. It never goes. You got to just keep managing it as it comes up.
So interesting, and it's like that. It's like a survival fear, isn't it?
It is. It is. Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
And it's like it's nothing like the survival fear. I mean, can you imagine? I was doing a bit of reading when the Voice to Parliament thing came up, and I did a lot of research into it. I wanted to understand the First Fleet and all of that. And I realised, do you know how long the trip was on those little boats that they rode on to get from England to Sydney Cove? Do you know how long they were at sea?
No, I can imagine long
Eight
time.
months. 8
8 months. That's
months.
crazy.
It
My God.
was like, so when you got here, it's not like you were going to hurry back, right? So those people were really leaving first base with no intention to go back,
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
just surviving the trip across the sea and then getting here and not knowing whether you'd have a house. I mean, extraordinary. But we sit in these fears that really are very trivial, but they consume us like they're so real around, running out of money or those sorts of things. It's really it's sort of like almost a madness, isn't it? But it's so many people who'll be listening to this podcast are sitting right where you've described.
Exactly. It's a first world problem and it is kind of madness, and it's good to remind yourself of that. And even with reminding it, it's this innate thing. It's conditioned. It's probably from a generational thing. It's,
Yeah.
from our parents, it's in our psyche. So it has to be that reminder. And I think that's a really important message as well, that I think, especially for men, men and women, but men, I think, more affected by this in the sense of when we're suffering from a mental health related issue, anxiety, whatever it is, it might be like an example what I just said, and we might feel like ashamed to talk about it because there's people going through significantly worse things. So who am I to talk about my problem?
Yeah.
And that that's a shocking approach, because if we can talk about our problem, we're actually probably setting an example for that person who is really suffering and has no support, that it's okay for them to talk as well. And it's all relative. So it shouldn't be a comparison. And there's no problem that's better or worse, but we can't, we can't fix it if we don't talk about it.
Yeah, dead right. So true. And it's through, I believe, sharing my story with you, and then you share your story with me, we open up new perspectives. And I go,
Yeah.
oh, I never looked at it that way before. And I feel like we create flexibility in our thinking. So we're not just confessing what we've done or what we're worried about. We're opening up an opportunity for sharing of perspectives to gain flexible thinking. And there's a couple of things that come from that I want to ask you about. Number one is self-trust. I wonder, like, I have to trust myself to make enough money. I've been self-employed for years. I have to trust myself to be able to deliver. And sometimes I've failed at that, but I've got no choice but to trust myself. And if I start doubting myself, I'm actually not trusting myself. And I feel like a lot of men take on paid jobs because they want somebody else to look after that part of them, which is fine. We need men doing paid jobs. But I'm wondering if you've got any viewpoints on that whole area around self-trust.
Oh yeah, I think it's a huge one. And exactly like you said, obviously nothing against a paid job, but a lot of people probably that do have some sort of dream or something that they want to give to the world inside of them may be not pursuing that because of that fear and taking the safer option.
Yeah.
Again, fine, you should do whatever you want to do, whatever's right for you. But a lot of it is for that self-trust. And I mean,
Mhm.
I have gone the other path of never having the security, building a career in entertainment, in starting businesses, not having any security. And I've done that without having a lot of self-trust, and it's been really tough. And again, this has only been um, through more recent time, the last few years, where I've been actually aware of that. I didn't realize I didn't trust myself that much in the past, but I found I had all of these people around me that I was constantly trying to get validation from. What decision should I make? Is this okay? Should I do this? And it just created more anxiety, and I would eventually have to make my own decision anyway. And I started to realize, well, I think I don't actually fully trust myself, because if I did, why do I need this validation? So I've made significant improvement in that area, and it's made my life 10 times better.
Mm,
Um, but it still comes up. I still have to battle that. But I think talking about it's so important, because I think a lot of us, like me, I didn't know that I had that issue until I was confronted about it, and I really had to think about it. And as you were saying before, I think the most powerful thing is storytelling. That's how we learn. That's what 15 years ago, when I started getting in this area, that was all I did. I stood up and told my story, and I still to this day haven't seen anything more powerful. And I'm constantly being able, learning to accept myself more when I hear someone that I look up to or a peer talk about something similar. I'm like, oh, thank God. It gives me permission to realize I'm not alone. I'm not fucked. I don't have something innately wrong with me. Everyone is dealing with the same sort of stuff.
yeah, it's so interesting. And so many men out there who are sitting on stuff. Maybe they've done the wrong thing. In their mind, they start painting a picture that they're the only one that would do something so terrible, and they can't tell the world because it would be so damn humiliating if that was exposed. And I believe that that's one of the things that drives a lot of men to end their lives prematurely, because of that fear of the humiliation. But it's all been created in their minds. So thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it's just a huge issue, because the other end of that too is that if I don't trust myself, I don't know whether I'm going to be able to trust others. And so perhaps I'm going to be suspicious of others as well. And I'm just really interested in that, in terms of what that does to relationships, not just marital relationships, but relationships between an employee and an employer. And I think sometimes some of the more militant unions feed off that, to get what they want. I'm just interested. It's like, have you sort of any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think transparency is critical in any relationship, whether it's intimate friendship, a work relationship. Being honest and transparent, even if it's a hard conversation.
Mm,
If I go back to, using my own personal um, experience, or, what my experience with that is, where I've struggled is I've traditionally been a people pleaser. And
uh-huh.
again, it's
Yeah.
another thing I've getting much better with now. I've had to really work hard on that. That's been the biggest one for me. And again, that's changed my life dramatically. It's improved it so much, but I can default into that if I'm not careful.
Mm.
And that was causing a lot of problems. And I know that's a problem with a lot of people where we are saying what we think they want to hear. We're doing what we think they want us to do. We're, saying all these things that we don't actually believe to try and get a result, because we think it'll get a better result when actually maybe it might do that in the short term in a superficial way, but it's always going to backfire. It's not going to lead to anything positive long term. And people respect you a lot more, even if you don't agree with each other, if you can
Yeah.
actually just be honest and, tell someone what you're actually feeling.
Yeah. I mean, I had this conversation with a friend of mine on the weekend. She's in a job where, she's got a contract and she's ending up putting in so many more hours and she's angry at her employer and she's frustrated and she's feeling like she wants to quit. And I just got really interested in that. And I said to her, but have you got an agreement with your employer? And she goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, there must be some sort of agreement because they're paying you a certain amount, right?
Mhm.
She said, yeah. And I said, well, that must be part of your agreement. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, what else is there part of that agreement? Like, what do you have to do for that money? And she goes, I've got a job description. I said, great. So you have an agreement. They've put a job description. You've accepted that. So that's an agreement. And then they've put a financial offer and you've accepted that. So you've got an agreement, right?
Mm.
And she said, yeah. And I said, so the 5 hours that you're doing on your day off, is that in your job description? And she said, no, it's not. I said, well, you don't have to make them wrong or complain about it. You just go back to them and say, hey, can we have a look at our agreement for a sec? Because I feel like it's gone off the rails, you know?
Yeah.
And she goes, yeah, but I'll
Oh,
get the sack. I said, well, why would you want to work for somebody who's going to breach an agreement and not honor their agreement? Why would you want to work for someone like that? And
exactly. And a lot of, oh, sorry. Yeah, I think I
no, I
cut
was
you
going
off.
to say, and I was just going to say, I think that that's running for so many people. They don't understand. They turn it into some sort of, bad ogre versus poor helpless me, as opposed to this is just two parties in an agreement here. And I wanted to bring up with you about the courage part of it, because it's fine to have
Mm.
the moral compass, but then have we got the courage to stand up and go, you know what? We need to talk about this.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge one, and that's the thing. You see that in corporate all the time, doing these talks in these companies. It's such a big problem where people might want to talk about something or stand up for it, but they're terrified. Like the example you're saying, and it does take courage, and it takes. I think it's a self-esteem issue really, because if you're uh, worried to, like the example you said, if you're thinking, well, hang on. I'm worried to bring up this issue because I think it's unfair and this doesn't work for me. But if I bring it up, maybe they'll fire me. Like you said, well, if they do fire me, then that's proved to me it's not where I want to be working anyway. It's like being in a relationship where it's toxic and you're worried that if you try and change it, it might end. Well, if it ends because of that, or a friendship that ends because of that, well, then they're not a proper friend. Like, good, you got rid of them.
Yeah.
And you see it in corporate all the time where I've had too many times. It's mainly with men where I've done these talks. They've privately come up to me and said, "Hey, and these are people that had never talked about it. No one thinks they've got a problem, and they're saying, I just really resonated with that. I'm struggling with this, and this. I need help. I don't want to tell my boss. I can't do it. I can't tell anyone because I might lose my job, or I don't want to. I'm trying to get this pay rise, or whatever it is." And there's this fear. But I think if we innately value ourselves and we know what our worth is,
Yeah.
we then can be more comfortable saying what we actually think because we know, even if we do get fired, we've got enough value that we will get a job at a place where we actually are respected and valued. So it really all comes back to just doing the work on ourselves at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's supporting our friends to be more courageous as well. It's like, and I would say to a friend, well, what are you frightened of? What's the fear? What's stopping you? And they might give you an answer and say, well, but what's underneath that? And what's underneath that? Until they get to the point where they can see the irrationality behind their fear, because at the end of the day, if I'm a construction worker and I've got a problem, I go to my boss with it. I've got to understand if he sacks me, man, there's a whole rigmarole he's got to go through to get rid of me and then to replace me. And like that
Yeah,
causes interruption. So it's actually cheaper and easier for my boss to listen to what I'm saying and try and support me with it, But
significantly. Yeah.
it's the catastrophizing in the mind which is really significant. I know time's going on a little bit, but there's a couple other points I'm just excited to talk to you about because I love your perspectives. Um, I went out to Marsland College last week and I did a talk to the Year 12 boys. And, Marsland College is where I did my final 3 years of school. It's Morris Brothers College. And I love the place. I mean, I think it saved me because it knocked just enough of the bogan out of me for me to be able to survive in the world, And I was lucky enough to be elected as first 18 captain there. And I look back and I realised what that did for my self-esteem. And to this day, I was the first ever premiership captain. So those things had a huge part. And I've got so much gratitude for that school. I go back every year and I talk to the Year 12 boys. And it's just
Mm.
something I do as a service. And the school's really cool because they don't tell me what to talk about. They just allow me to come in and talk about what I want to talk about at the time. So I just feel for it. And I was talking to them about healthy masculinity, and I had no plan. I just wanted to be totally in feel. And I said to them, you're going to come across this term toxic masculinity. There's a couple of reasons for me bringing this up. And I said to them, I'm going to define toxic masculinity for you. It's actually a scale that starts at idiot and finishes in dickhead. And sometimes if it's really bad, it goes all the way to asshole, And I said, part of your path in developing your masculinity is noticing when your mates are slipping into idiot or dickhead or asshole and pulling them out and making them accountable, right? And I feel like that term toxic masculinity is thrown around to take power away from men instead of them, feeling confident when they know they're doing the right thing and they're having the courage to show up, and somebody else might not like it and they get thrown at this toxic masculinity. And you've seen it, I'm just really interested in your perspective around how that's tending to, perhaps that term is making men fearful of actually showing up.
Yeah, I think your example's spot on. I think it probably is making men fearful, and it needs to be we need to present things in a more positive way. We need to change our language. We need education. There's not education in this area. It's why, you're doing this podcast. It's why I'm doing my one. We need to have these conversations. And I think that's the biggest thing. It is starting to change, but it's got such a long way to go. So I think from a very young age, we need to be taught how to do these things, like you're saying, how to stand up for ourselves, how to lead by example, how to go against the pack if we don't agree with what they're doing. And it's really hard even now at my age at 37, when I'm around a big group of guys and I don't agree with their behavior, I'll catch myself wanting to sort of people please and, not sort of go against it, but then I'll have to, then you do, and then I'll tell them, no, I don't agree with this. But it's really hard when you're in a group of men. You want to all egg each other on to in whatever the behavior is. So
Yeah.
having having really the strength of character and understanding that you need, to go and stand up for whatever you believe in, I think is so important.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a leadership role for men to play here. And, there's times when we need women to lead. I don't think this is a gender thing, it's a people thing, but I feel like I read something last week and it was just, it hit me like a train about how men can actually start to help women a little bit more now, because this toxic masculinity is being thrown around too much and it's being thrown around erroneously. And it related back to, I was reading an incredible article on a fellow by the name of Bayard Rustin, who was one of Martin Luther King's contemporaries and one of his really impressive contemporaries. But he doesn't really have a place in industry because he was an outwardly gay man, you know.
Mm.
And but what a genius and so brilliant. And his essays are just, my God, they're such an incredible read. And he said that really, from a legal perspective, between the School Desegregation Act of 1954 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, America legally solved all of its racism problems. And things could grow from there. But it got sidetracked by the militants who decided on a no-win policy. And the only way to change white hearts was by traumatizing them, you know, and making them wrong and making them continually repent for the past. And he said they got aided and abetted by soft white men who bowed over and tried to self-flagellate for the past instead of creating this new brotherhood, you know. And he said, and he wrote back then that it was creating identity politics that would send us off on a terrible tangent, which he predicted it, right? But I feel like maybe the same thing's happening here too. The feminist movement's so powerful, so beautiful, so incredibly wonderful. Women really stepped up. But I'm really struggling to see where there's inequality between men and women now, you know? And you know, I keep hearing about the gender pay gap, but I've never discovered anybody who's actually feels aggrieved around that. And I'm wondering whether there's a militant arm of the feminist movement that still wants to make men pay for something, you know, and driving this toxic masculinity. And then you've got men who want to align themselves with the feminists for safety, who are picking up that mantle and throwing it around. And we actually really need to get rid of it and start
Yeah,
to have different.
exactly. I mean, it's the same as the political divide where there's so much extremism on each end, and you're almost shamed if you want to, if you're a Labour supporter, but you had an agreement with some views of the Liberal government, you might be shamed.
Yeah,
And this polarity is just incredibly unhealthy because it's never. I mean, anyone logical should be able to understand that is not going to lead to anything good. And it's the same with what you're talking about there with men and women. The extremes make no sense. So it should be logic. We both want the best for everyone.
yeah,
So if I'm a man and I feel there's injustice and I talk about it, if someone's going to judge me or shame me for that, that shouldn't be my problem because I'm actually trying to talk about a real issue here.
yeah,
And if women are being mistreated, then as a man, we should be supporting that. So but then going to this extreme, I think there is that level on both sides that happens where
mm,
there's people have a chip on their shoulder. I feel like on any level, really, whenever someone's taking it to the extreme, it's just actually a escapism and a cop out for not taking accountability for your own situation. It's like when someone has road rage, if they're screaming at you over this minor thing, clearly they're not angry about that incident. They've just got all of this aggression that's pent up because they're struggling with probably so many deep, deep issues they're not willing to address.
mm,
So it's much easier to just scream and blame it on everyone else. But at the end of the day, if we don't work on ourselves, then we can't solve these problems. So I think it's on so many levels, that
uh,
polarity is just such an issue.
yeah. And I think we can, and I feel like that's where the men can step up and when those terms toxic masculinity are thrown out, just stop and gently ask, what do you mean by that? Expand on
Yeah.
that for me, you know, like help that person to realize that they're reaching for a cheap weapon as opposed to opening their heart up and exploring the situation. I mean, I so desire for a time when human beings can sit down and just have beautiful and real conversations, you know, and really explore and grow together. But maybe I'm a little utopian on that score, but I don't mind, you know. I mean, Harry Palmer, who created the Avatar course, he said, if you want to create peace on the planet, introduce people to each other, create more
Yeah,
friendships, Yeah, it's so
absolutely.
interesting, mate. I mean, there's so many areas that we can keep exploring in this topic, and maybe you and I can have another conversation in the future because I really like the fact that there's a big separation between us in age, and you've got perspectives that I don't have, and those sorts of things. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And I just would love it if, before we go, if you could just share a little bit with us about your platform, because I've got construction workers who tune into this podcast. So I'd love to know what you're doing with your software platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, mate. I love coming on and always love chatting with you. And, same with you. I learn so much talking to you, and I feel like we could talk for another 2 hours if we had the time. So there's always never enough time to talk about everything. But yeah, the platform, I've been working in the construction industry for a while. So we've built a tool for organizations where it gives you access to content from a whole range of experts across financial, physical, nutritional health, and everything from coaches to therapists to dietitians. So it's a marketplace of all of these different experts, and they put all of their content on there. So you can scroll like a social media platform where you're getting access to all of the content. And then from there, if you want to actually book a session with whatever expert it is, you can then go and look at their profile and do a one-on-one session. So it's a marketplace to just give people that exposure in a very simple way to have access to whatever area they identify they might want to work on in a very, easing them into it.
Fantastic. I mean, you mentioned there the financial well-being. I mean, that's an area that's just starting to be explored on my global initiative for the Global Wellness Institute. There's a fellow in the UK, Ryan Briggs. He's doing a lot of that work in that area. And can you imagine construction workers who got so responsible with their money over the first 10 or 15 years of their career? They set themselves up so that they don't need a wage anymore. Like
Yeah,
really responsible, save, invest, and then they can go to work because they love going to work.
yeah, exactly,
Because
exactly.
a lot of those guys in the construction industry are in there because they like building stuff.
Exactly. They
So
actually love what they're doing. So it's no, but and it's a huge area. Financial is a big one because it's one of the biggest anxiety stresses for people. The world's getting more expensive. Don't get, education in school about finances normally, about how to manage your finances. So people can fall flat on their face before they learn. And, we want to avoid that, like you're saying.
yeah, so true, mate. Well, one question I ask everybody at the end of the podcast is, who was somebody when you were growing up that you looked up to, somebody you thought, wow, that's somebody who I really trust who they are and how they conduct themselves, and I feel like I'd like to model myself on that person.
So I had a bunch in the sense of people I idolized when I was competing in sport. So when I got into middle distance running, there was a guy, Steve Prefontaine, this American distance runner who was really didn't have the physical capability, but became the best middle distance runner in history in America. He actually died in a car crash at 24. So it was a bit of a James Dean sort of story. He was larger than life. But it was all the psychology. He just had the most self-belief of any athlete I've ever heard of. And he was able to just, push himself to that limit. So he really inspired me. But in my actual life, my uncle was my biggest influence. So he actually passed away during COVID, sadly. But since I was a little kid, I think he saw a lot of himself in me, and he saw that I wanted to, compete. Originally wanted to play AFL, and he would come and train with me 3 nights a week after work. He'd drive all the way to Williamstown from Albert Park, from where he lived, and he would train with me. And then later on, when I was getting into athletics, he'd come to all the meets. And when I got into acting, he actually had done a bit of acting himself, so he'd help me with that. And just but just instilled in me this belief of I believe in you and you can do whatever you want if you work at it. And really just, was the only person in my life that I had that really instilled that in me. And I don't think I would have gone down the path I've gone down if I didn't have that, because it's another big thing that we might have good people around us, but we don't have to have people that really actually believe us.
Mm,
And we normally have the opposite, which, that's some of the demons I still fight, where you've got people saying, no, it's going to be too hard. Look at all these people who failed, etc. People will put all of that into your head. So having that one person who just drummed all that positive stuff into my head, that's just now burnt into my brain. I've got his name tattooed in Arabic, I've got his name tattooed on my wrist.
wow.
So I always refer to that. Anytime I'm struggling, I just think of him. So that's made a big, big difference for me.
What a guardian angel.
Yeah,
What was his
really
name?
has been. Bruce.
Bruce. Wow. Go, Bruce. Isn't it amazing you bring up Steve Prefontaine? Because really, I mean,
Oh, of course. Yeah, I forgot you would know about him. Yeah, yeah,
well, yeah, I mean, he got ripped off by the blood doping. I mean, Lassie Fearon got all the glory, but Steve
yeah.
Prefontaine was, I mean, he was the inspiration for Nike.
Well, because it was Bill Baum and Steve Knight who, yeah, he's coach was making all the shoes off a waffle iron and all that.
That's right.
Have
Well,
you seen the movies, the
yes,
Without Limits?
oh yeah, I have, mate. Yeah.
One of my favorite films. I love it.
Well, you see, my biggest mentor was Chris Jones. And
Right.
Chris, I mean, I wrote a page about him in my book. I mean, what Chris taught me was extraordinary. He came into my life when I was 20 years of age, and he was extraordinary. And my gratitude to Chris was unbelievable. And he did all of he's an Englishman, Chris. He grew up in a pub in Liverpool, studied phys ed. He walked away from the band that he was in to study phys ed. And the band became really successful less than a year later, and he was the drummer out of the Hollies.
Oh, wow.
But he went on to do his master's and PhD studies at Oregon State University. And after I saw that film, I rang him. I said, Jonesy, did you know Steve Prefontaine? He goes, he was my housemate.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
What the hell?
yeah,
Gee, that
yeah.
is crazy. I can't,
Yeah.
that's unbelievable.
So
I
I'll
can't,
have to
that's
I'll have to organise a coffee with you to meet Jonesy so you can ask him about your hero.
I would love to. And just final thing on Prefontaine, so I moved to New York 3 years ago. When I was the first summer I was here, I wanted to get out of New York, and I went to Oregon. I went to Eugene, Oregon, because I wanted to, I'd read about it, seen so much about it. And it was just such an amazing experience being there. I checked out all the, Prefontaine areas where he crashed his car, and actually in a crazy turn of events met his sister.
Wow.
So that was, and she basically, oh, sorry, I'm probably taking up too much time, but
No, no, I love it.
so this was a bizarre sort of situation. So I was in Eugene, and he grew up in Coos Bay, which is about a 2.5 hour drive. And I was in a local store talking to this English guy about and he was saying, oh well, if you're that interested, I know his sister is the only remaining relative alive. She used to do all these tours where, once every 3 months you'd do a tour, take people to his gravesite, to where they grew up, to where he trained. Uh, so I reached out to her and said to her, "Look, I almost went too above and beyond because I was so excited, and I was releasing a book. I was saying, I'm releasing this book. I'd love to send you a copy. I love I heard you do this. I'd give anything, even if you're not doing the tours. Can I come and have a coffee with you?" And I get this big email back saying, like quite abusive, saying, I think you're trying to sell me on something, and I've had this happen to me too many times. People always want to get to me because of my brother, and I had a guy from Hollywood try and turn up at my doorstep and convince me to do a film and blah, blah, blah. So then I'm backpedaling and telling her, no, no, no. I just, I felt awful because I was just so, like, to me, the thought of just meeting her would be the best thing in the world. And she didn't believe me. So I thought, okay, this is sad, but I'm going to go to Coos Bay anyway. Drove there, and they have publicly listed where he grew up, the house where he grew up. So I'm like, okay, I'll go and check it out. So this is at the end of the day, after being there for 5 hours. I pull up to the front of the house. I'm out the side looking at it. I'd seen what she looks like. She pulls in the driveway, and I see that she saw me, and I froze because I'm thinking, I really hope she doesn't know who I am. She gets out of the car, starts yelling at me, saying, "I looked you up. You're trying to stalk me, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, no, no, this is a crazy chain of events. I didn't even know you're here, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we eventually got talking, and I think she saw like how genuine I was about it and said, "I'm so sorry." And we spent 3 hours together after that. She took me for,
Wow.
to into the track where he used to train. She showed me all these personal things. And it was just this weird experience where it went from this just and so many things where I just was feeling like, this lady thinks I'm a bloody stalker or I'm like trying to manipulate her or something. And it was just anyway. Sorry, I'm rambling on, but it was just
No,
I almost forgot about it, but it was just such a weird situation.
but it's so funny because towards the end of my podcast, I like to just talk about something great that happened in sport this week.
Yeah.
And I know it wasn't this week, but that sort of covers that part.
There you go.
So,
That covers that one. Yeah.
so, mate, thanks so much. My final thing that I like to put into my podcast is I just like to pull out a really nice quote about masculinity. And this one was from Clint Eastwood. And it said, "The most gentle people in the world are the macho males. People who are confident in their masculinity and have a feeling of well-being in themselves. They don't have to kick indoors, mistreat women, or make fun of gays."
I love that.
Right? Hey, pretty cool.
That's
So
great.
thanks so much, mate. Look forward to our next conversation. Maybe we'll be able to catch up when I'm in the US next. As you know, I'm going to be traveling back and forth a bit, or when you're in Aussie. But yeah, and thank you everybody for tuning in. Make sure you tune into Nick's podcast, Move Your Mind, and it's available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And it's a really brilliant podcast. And yeah, and don't forget, as you step out into life, be the adult that you needed when you were a little kid and you were afraid or feeling vulnerable. So thank you.
Mate, thank you so much.